Hello, everyone. Welcome to the 28th annual HP Lovecraft Film Festival in our streaming edition. We're here with the filmmakers of Twisted Lit, the anthology film you just saw, with filmmakers John Strysik and Jay Woelfel. Thanks, guys. Thanks for joining us.
You're welcome.
Thanks for having us.
So this was a really interesting, piece that John was bugging me for months to watch. I even went through a broken Blu-ray player to try to get at it to watch it. But I was really impressed by everything I'd seen. John's piece, A Hunger Artist, based on the Kafka story, I had seen before because we worked on it a little bit back in the early days of the pandemic. But I hadn't seen the other two, and I was really impressed by the way they hang together. And for those of you that just watched it, you know that the first film in the piece is a story called He by Guy de Maupassant that was made by Jay. And the second one, A Hunger Artist, is based on the Franz Kafka story made by John Strysik. And the final film, The Birthmark, is based on the Nathaniel Hawthorne story. All three very respected sort of weird authors. I think you could argue perhaps that Kafka is something different than weird or surreal or a symbolist or something, right? But they all fit very nicely together into this collection of weird horror, if you will. But as anybody who's just seen the films can tell, they're not new movies, right? Why don't you talk a little bit about sort of the genesis of the individual films, and then we'll talk a little bit later about why the choice to bring them together. Well, which was the first one of these that was made?
I think it's mine, Hunger Artist.
Yeah.
That's like 1980. I just wanted to mention something about, you mentioned, Kafka, and I always thought he related to Lovecraft in a way, because years ago, I wrote an article for St. Joshi's Lovecraft Studies, and it was called Yin and Yang and Franz and Howard. And I always thought, they're one of my two favorite. Well, I have a trilogy of writers back here because I'm an ex-Catholic, so it's Lovecraft. You can see, Kafka right there, and Samuel Beckett. They're my three big guys. But I always thought that Lovecraft and Kafka bookended story. They kind of created modern storytelling. And if you had an example of a forest, say, so Lovecraft would look at this forest and he would see the top of a interdimensional cosmic creature that's too, big to even describe. But Kafka would go into the bark and look at bugs. But they'd be writing about the same thing, which is kind of like alienation. There's a lot of that in both their stories. And as a matter of fact, I have the book. This is my high school literature book called Man in Literature, where I first read the Kafka story. In fact, I used it, to write the script with. It's right here. And it was under a section called The Alienated. And the reason I made this film was because of this, because I would see in literature classes, they would show movies, and the movies were adaptations sometimes of stories, and I always thought they were pretty horrible. So I thought if I could adapt this story and do a decent job of it, maybe I could get it in distribution for schools. And that did happen. It was a place called Film Ideas, and that's sort of how it starts to relate with Jay's movie too. It's a weird kind of cosmic dance going on, but maybe Jay should take it from there.
Yeah, I didn't really know that, but John's kind of taken the words from my mouth in terms of seeing these. And a couple of the films are great. One is but most of the literary films you'd watch were just awful. And then if you weren't completely turned off from reading by them, which I think probably some people were, there was a great animated version of The Telltale Heart, which I think James Mason did the voiceover for, although it's not Poe's text, it's his story. And there's a great version of A Young Goodman Brown, which John and I both saw and loved, which is probably why I actually read some more Hawthorne, because that was actually great. And I saw that in junior high school and in high school. So it was a film that they were crossed that border of whatever,
I saw that movie at a rock concert in Chicago. And it was it blew everybody's mind. I hate to sound cliche at the time, but it was just amazing because it does have pretty cool effects in it, kind of 2001-ish, but
Yeah.
I
So
recall seeing that same version. I know what you mean. Yeah.
yeah, I have a
Yeah.
copy of it. I finally tracked down a
Oh,
DVD of it. Yeah.
yeah. But yeah, so that was my motivation for we me and some other people who went to film school together started working on each other's movies, which was a huge plus and something I found out later was very rare, especially in California when everybody were rivals and no one would help anybody. People try to keep the cameras out long to screw the guy and the people next and stuff. It was that kind of attitude. But so me and girls and guys, this group, we made a bunch of movies. We wanted to do a feature because it was the 80s and, video stores and all this stuff. Well, the money fell through at the last minute. It's like, oh, well, now what do we do? I don't think I'd adapted the birthmark yet. I think around then was when I started looking for, well, if we're going to do another short, what would it be? And I went to read some more Hawthorne, and like the first one I picked up was the birthmark. I already owned that book. I read many others afterwards, but that one was kind of the first one that struck me. And so, yeah, the thing was, the idea was let's make it to be better than these crappy versions of these great authors' works that we were subjected to. And we did it, and then we got distribution through this company, Film Ideas, out of Chicago. And most of Film Ideas stuff was, Seven is your friend, the life of a frog, all these type of things. There weren't very many literary adaptations, but one was John's film, and I'd read that in college, actually, in an English class. And so that's probably the reason why I figured, like, well, let's try them. They really sort of found the film ultimately through a film festival, the National Educational Film Festival, which the birthmark was an honorable mention.
Oh, we should tell people these are 16mm prints. This is before video and VHS and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, we made prints of these. He was actually shot in 35. So he was done. Again, as we were ramping up to do this feature, I knew a guy, this Bill Pavetta guy, who owned 35mm equipment, and he'd done a short with a friend of mine, which I had worked on. So I ended up doing 2 35mm shorts, kind of building up to doing the 16mm feature because we didn't have enough money to shoot a whole feature in 35. Right. So these 2 shorts were actually finished kind of after the feature because we went right into the feature. So he was the first film which actually was completed in Los Angeles. The sound work was done out here, and Come to Me Softly, the other one, also was done in LA. So weirdly, the 2 35 shorts sort of jumped the shark in terms of one coast of the Lake Erie to the coast of the Pacific.
Mid coast.
So John and I met because I knew his film through Film Ideas, and his demo reels would be on the same desks of people I was going in to work with. I also learned what hummus was thanks to John's episode of Dark Side, where they're on a train and somebody goes like, "You want some hummus?" The guy kind of looks at him weirdly, goes, "You know what a hummus is, right? It's ground up chickpeas." I didn't eat it still for many years, but at least I knew what it was. So eventually, John
that guy's in The Godfather, by the way, who says that.
Well, there you go. So John and I eventually met at a Lovecraft Film Festival.
Yeah, that's where we met up in Portland. Yeah.
When my film Beyond Dream's Door was shown there for the first time, John was just leaving, and as I was coming, Ramsey Campbell was there. And anyway,
but strangely enough, our films met before in the same distribution company. And the other thing, so it's kind of because I saw Jay's 2 films and I really loved them, and I thought there's a common theme in these films because they all have a twist ending, and we have a good friend named Jeff Rack, and they used to do a show down here forever called Wicked Lit, where they would take literature stories and but this was live action. So they did them at a mausoleum, and you would walk through the mausoleum. It was one of those immersive things. And or it would go into the cemetery, and they would have fake sepulchers, and Dracula's would jump out. And he did a really good adaptation, actually a live action adaptation of From Beyond, with the creatures on poles with lights under them, and like floating down hallways and things. And so I always enjoyed Wicked Lit, but that kind of went out of business, unfortunately. So I thought, well, Twisted Lit. So steal from the best. I steal from your friends that you like, So because each one of these does have a weird twist, and they're all kind of about obsessions and frankly, I was wondering putting these together how they would play, and I was amazed how well they play together. I mean, I was really entertained by them all. And then we put those little like interstitial like bios, and also looking at the stories, which me and Andrew did when we did Lurk in the Lobby, where you would look at a film and then you would take it to what story it's based on and what it changed and why it did it, and was it a good idea? Was it usually it's a bad idea? But so that's the idea. And then wondering if those things would play between them, and they do. It's almost like, I don't know, a palate cleanser in a way or something, or it gives some, it comments on the stories. And all these authors had fantastic, interesting lives.
Yeah.
And again, if we do market this to schools, that's another plus. So
Yeah.
that's basically the genesis of this thing.
Yeah, it's John's idea. Although the birthmark and his film were seen for years, and played in festivals and things like that. He never actually. It showed at a couple festivals, mostly to people like going, "What the hell was that?" Which, in a way, I guess, is the honest response you should have. That's the final question of the movie is, well, he ? Yeah, what is he? But really, it was largely unreleased.
Well, I get to like he better every time I see it, Jay. I think it's really good. The first time I saw it, I think I had that question, but the more you see it, it's a creepy little story, and you did great stuff with shadows and and things you are almost well, they are kind of subliminal, but you start seeing, and that's the way films should work, that uneasiness, and like there's a skull thing that I didn't see before in a shadow, and it was very cool. So
it is it is a beautiful color palette, and it's did you say it was shot on 35?
That was shot in 35 on Fuji film, which has very great blues and greens, and Fuji always had their own kind of life to them. But yeah, the original video transfer of He was awful. The prints looked good. The transfer was done at a real lab. Everything should have been in the right. Also in the prints, when he finally emerges inside of the sheets, the big face shot, a giant truck of dirt kind of like goes by his face. So that's gone from this, and so it finally really looks like what the prints looked like when you saw them. So this is its real chance to be seen and hopefully appreciated. And it was interesting that you knew you were saying you were talking about doppelgangers, and that you knew the story, because most people
don't. Yeah.
Or it's also known as terror. Maupassant, since he wrote in French, well, Kafka didn't write in English either. We're dealing with translations, and Maupassant, especially, I think some of his original American editions were proved to contain stories he did not write, and all this kind of stuff. So the titles were changed, and sometimes it wasn't even his work, or other stories were dropped. Maupassant didn't live very long, but worked like a demon, I think, because he knew he was losing his mind in particular. So that there's so much Maupassant. His newspaper writing is still largely uncollected. All of that's uncollected to this day.
Yeah, some of his stories could be based on hallucinations that he had, actually.
This one, yeah.
Brian, I was going to ask you, do you know, because I know Lovecraft knew Hawthorne very well.
Yeah.
Was he a fan of Maupassant?
He was, yeah.
He must have been, yeah, because he read everything. And
the Horla, I think Lovecraft talked about the Horla, which I think is an overly talked about story.
Yeah.
I think Lovecraft himself and many scholars believe that the Horla in part inspired the Call of Cthulhu, the story that he
really?
used there were some elements from that he that played into it, and then also I think History of the Necronomicon, which is a very, very short vignette of a story, kind of takes off from the is it a Maupassant idea, or is it a Bierce thing with the invisible monster? I guess it's the Horla. Is basically
the Horla's kind of. I was thinking more maybe Dunwich Horror too, but with the invisible monster.
But yeah, it's clear he was influenced by Maupassant. And the story I think that the reason I mentioned it when we talked the other day is that we I think last year at the festival we had several films that dealt with doppelgangers, and one of the famous cases of somebody that felt like they had a doppelganger that they were dealing with was Maupassant. He claimed that he walked into a study one day and there he was
Yes.
himself. And that he was the story. He was the first one that the doppelganger narrated to him, and basically he wrote it down. And
Oh,
there
I
were a
didn't
few
even know that.
stories
Wow.
like that. So he claims that he didn't really. It wasn't him, but it was he that wrote it.
Yeah, he's channeling he,
I
him,
mean, yeah.
her.
Yeah, I mean, certainly he, the main character's ideas, which I soften some in the film, go along with the young Maupassant in terms of women are kind of just a plaything and shouldn't be taken seriously. And, so he's sort of desperately searching for a connection that he realizes he's lost and it's too late for him. But yeah, that certainly is part of Maupassant's sort of, worldview up to a point.
Yeah.
Sort
We
of,
talk about Maupassant's epitaph in one of the little bio things, and it was like, I have coveted everything and taken pleasure in nothing. That's a writer's point of view.
yeah, yeah.
Well,
Maupassant, of course, is a bit like Bierce, although Bierce sort of grew out of newspaper writing, where Maupassant continued to do both. But I certainly see a sort of connection between the two of them.
Oh, and I should say, I wanted to mention one other thing with, first of all, thanks, you helped me a lot with Hunger Artist, cleaning it up and getting it whipped in shape, Brian, and, but I wanted to mention another connection to Lovecraft with, our music of Eric Zahn, which was shot by the same guy his name is Michael Goy. And that was another kind of fun thing we did, because in Eric Zahn, it was sort of like, okay, let's almost do The Color Out of Space. Let's get that, that 19th century atmosphere with the oil lamps and yellow and all this kind of stuff. And in this one, we were trying to make it a bit colder, more Kafkaesque. And we were thinking of like a 1920s kind of silent film look to it. And if you get the DVD, if we ever remake it, we did a commentary track, and Mike talks about how the lighting changes during the course of the film. So in the beginning, when he's on stage, when he's like like the celebrity, it's hard light, and everything's defined. And as he goes in the circus, it gets grayer and grayer as he's kind of like going into the background. He's like fading, his life force, his energy is kind of fading away. And it's a subtle thing. Goy is a genius DP, and now he's like the #1 director out here. And as a matter of fact, he's one of the driving forces behind that Avatar, The Last Airbender, the live action version. So he's a producer director on it. And, I'm sure that's going to look amazing. But anyway, hats off to him and my buddy, Bob Rothman, who also starred in Eric Zahn. He's also the star of Hunger Artist, who recently passed away tragically, but he's on the commentary track too. But I had this nice little kind of group happening back then in Chicago. It was all through Columbia College and friends of ours. So it was like, hey kids, let's put on a show,
No,
and those two movies have lasted the test of time, but mainly I think because the source material is so good, Lovecraft and coffee, you can't go wrong, so.
Yeah,
well, you could go.
Well, you could go wrong. Yeah, people have gone wrong.
No, I kind of figured, like, even if ours wasn't great, it couldn't be as terrible as some of the bad things I'd watched, because we actually cared. Some of those almost seemed like assignments to people who work for industrial companies. It's like, oh yeah, let's go to the historical village and shoot for a day, and let's go home. I think we've had enough for today. That seemed to be kind of the attitude. There's a version of The Birthmark which had that just lifeless, passionless feel to it. But yeah, I had the same kind of group of filmmaker friends, that really helped all these things get done.
Yeah, and you were able to use that group into doing feature.
Yeah.
So well, you went one step beyond me, Jay.
Right. Okay. Yeah, that's true.
Gwen had made the comment earlier that she wishes that these were the kinds of films that were shown when she was in school, because she recalls the same sort of lifeless adaptations of works that you get to see when the teacher didn't really want to teach. But these are films that are she really liked the way that not just how dramatic they were, but also how the educational bits sort of between each, really helped really helped heighten the experience of watching the films.
Yeah,
In-
for example, I never knew when I was shooting Hunger Artist that Kafka was starving to death when he wrote it, because he had this tumor in his throat where he couldn't eat. And as he's correcting the galleys, he's in the hospital starving, which is unbelievable to me, because Kafka looked at his stories as comedies, really. Any story, when he would read a story out loud to friends, he'd be laughing his ass off, and everybody's like going, wow, this is serious, isn't it? Not to him, and Hunger Artist does have that weird sense of humor about it, with the twist and everything. So yeah, when you try to capture the spirit of the author, and you got to love I never understood where people want to adapt stories and then they just change everything. And all that's left is maybe the, Lovecraft's name on it, say, for Lovecraft adaptations. Why don't they do the story if they want to adapt it? There must be something about the story that they like, but yeah, that's a whole other subject.
Yeah, in the Birthmark, I actually worked in some other themes from Hawthorne in general. The Bagliani character is actually from Rappaccini's daughter, because in the Birthmark,
Oh yeah.
in the Birthmark, he does have a sort of assistant who, the way he's described, is very much like Igor, the hunchback kind of thing. And I felt that by now is so associated with Frankenstein and all of that I wanted a sort of a more intellectual equal to Aylmer, so they could talk about what they're doing. And so Rappaccini's daughter sort of served a little of that function in that story. So I imported him, another one of his students or whatever, as Aylmer. And then there's the one thing I added. These are shorts, but he's very short, so I added very little to he. But the Birthmark, the one element I added was a sort of like the idea of the sins of the father, which, almost like Lovecraft's mythos, becomes something that's ladled over Hawthorne in general, that's what he's all about, because of his own connection to Hawthorne and the witch trials. And so I added that to the Birthmark as sort of a, I suppose I've talked with you guys about people who make Lovecraft movies and have to put the Necronomicon in there, even if the story didn't have it. So I guess I did the same damn thing. Sins of the Father, where he talks about his grandfather trying to be a scientist, and so he's inherited this sort of, not the sin of science, but the sin of a bad motivation, of trying to, again, the cliche of trying to play God, trying to. Hawthorne wrote a great story called Artist of the Beautiful, which is almost like a Kafka kind of story, about this guy who wants to create this perfect mechanical thing for his child, or he's just doing it. And he builds this beautiful mechanical butterfly out of gold, and it's really mystical and whimsical. It's not really big, and he finally sort of lets it take flight. And this is before there is manned flight, so he's also creating something that doesn't exist, this flying thing. So he creates it, and all the adults are kind of mystified, and his kid comes in and sort of squashes it, thinking it's a bug. And that's when the story ends. There's no, the characters we don't have a payoff to, but this, in the Birthmark, he's trying to fix his wife, just like the Artist of the Beautiful. The artist is trying to create some idealistic thing in a brutally realistic world. And so there's a collision of, creation and reality.
Yeah. You mentioned Rappaccini's daughter, and that's another great example of a really mediocre adaptation I saw in school. They did not show
I saw that too. Yeah.
Yeah. There's the movie, the anthology called Twice Told Tales, right, of Hawthorne stuff. That's pretty awful. And they do it in that too. Yeah. There's a, yeah.
It's shades better than the one they showed us. The one they showed us in school.
Oh, okay.
Pretty pale.
Yeah.
At least it has Vincent.
Right. Yeah. No. Yeah. I mean, it's got Vincent Price in it. Yeah. They squandered, and that director made some good stuff, but that seems like an assignment. Oh God, I hated these stories in school. Let's get through this as fast as possible. My dinner's getting cold at home, Rappaccini's daughter, if you're going to do that story, you've really got to create a magical jungle. And both of those arguably didn't have the budget, or should have really went to an arboretum and added some additional stuff, because the fake plants, and that just kills that story. That story is just dead immediately, you know.
Yeah, yeah.
So also in the birthmark, there's it's also a beautifully shot film, but um, it's pretty notably visually different than he.
Right.
Much different color palette, much more dreamy and orange, and then also I'm guessing that's a an anamorphic lens sort of thing that you're doing in that.
Yeah, I really did. I mean, there are different DPs on both of those movies and a different format, different aspect ratios. But yeah, I'd already made the birthmark when I made the He. So I'm not the kind of director who's looking to just like do what he already did. I already did that, you know. So I'm trying to explore new avenues, and I'm very much into using colors symbolically or purposely. Let me put it that way, rather so pompous or whatever. So yeah, he's color palette is different than the birthmark. Yeah, we shot with the anamorphic lens, which means it's squeezed and then stretched when you project it later. It also means that all 4:3 TVs where it was released originally were all cropped and weird looking, and so it's even a tiny bit cropped even now with HD. But you're really seeing most of the whole frame. But yeah, it was shot with anamorphic, which was very cumbersome to deal with. But I'd use that format in something else, and I couldn't do my feature, so I had to do another short. So I wanted to shoot anamorphic. The feature was not going to be anamorphic for sure. So it was the last time I got to shoot in anamorphic, actually. Yeah, that's true. Well, that makes me sad. But anyway.
I think I think it can still be done. There's certainly filmmakers that are using antique lenses to do it sort of the old way.
Yeah.
But of course now it's not even, it's a thing that I think mostly is passing out of even people knowing what it is. You know?
Yeah, I mean, it's really the idea of anamorphic is that it makes the screen bigger, not smaller. And so it's just too bad that when HD didn't come along, they didn't make it 235. They didn't even make it 185. They made it 178 or 16:9 if you want to get out your mathematics. And I've been a big format, not junkie, but arguing with people about, you know, getting formats wrong. And yeah, so it's really now not even the purpose of what it was intended to be. And I've worked with filmmakers who shoot in HD. So it is 178. But then they, you know, cropped it even more to make it look more like a movie. So it's like Toho scope for these like very narrow, you know, like the Napoleon, you know, with the 3 screens or Cinerama. They want truly like a letterbox hiding inside of your frame. And then they make the credits so small you can't read them. It's like, dude, this is not going to show on a big screen. Let me see your credits. Use your frame for something other than black, you know. It's like, so yeah, so I hate to be a curmudgeon about people letterboxing stuff, but
that is a nice thing that's kind of come out of the past few years, which I hesitate to say anything nice about the DCI DCP format. But one of the ratios it champions is the scope ratio, and at some theaters, especially the Hollywood theater, you know, their big 60-foot screen. Normally, if you just go to see a movie there, it's just your normal kind of, you know, 16:9 sort of ratio. But that's masked. And so when they're showing something in scope, they can wheel back those masks. And it's a curved, it's an old Cinerama style screen.
okay.
But when they show scope films on it, have really been done great. 2K or even 4K scope, they can now newly show. It really creates an immersive experience. But there's nothing more frustrating for me as a festival director than to get like a DCP of a film that looks like they made it to be scope, but it's a flat format. And I end up like, you know, going back and forth or trying to convert it myself, or they'll do something sort of and we shouldn't be talking about me, but they'll do something really amazing, like they'll do the whole film in scope, but then one scene will be like flat ratio. You know, so it'll pop outside of that scope barrier. So I'll be like, oh, this is great. I'll convert this DCP so it'll run scope and it'll look really amazing. And then I see that something is getting cut off when I run through it. And oh, I can't. I have to leave it like that. So for most of the film, it's going to be this little narrow box on this big black screen, except for one little bit that pops out. You know, like if you're in scope, stay in scope.
Uh-huh. I do like. I mean, I do like 178. It's certainly better than 4.3.
Yeah.
Like I said, it's just too bad they didn't even go further than
Yeah,
that.
yeah, but a lot of guys go back to 4.3 nowadays. You
Yeah.
know, I
Not a
don't know if
lot,
it's
but some.
nostalgia, but wasn't the Lighthouse shot in that was like
Yes, Lighthouse
4.3?
was shot. Yeah, Lighthouse was shot 4.3.
And
I do.
sometimes they'll play around with the ratios, but I mean Kubrick did that. I think Dr. Strangelove has different ratios in it. I'm pretty sure.
I think that's just a function of where Kubrick liked what 1.66, right? Was his favorite aspect ratio, which in Europe you go see American films and you'll see light stands and stuff, you know, I mean,
Right.
lights above people's heads because they show it unmasked. I mean, you kind of have more control about that now with your masters, you know, people have to blow them up. But yeah, I mean, Wes Anderson plays with aspect ratios. I did that with this Battlestar Galactica trailer I did for Richard Hatch intentionally, because then 4.3 would fill the whole frame. So when we did like space shots, it would fill the whole frame, which was 4.3, and the rest would be. And then somebody put it up on YouTube and like recropped it and blew it all up. See, I fixed it. It's like, no.
Well, you know, it's kind of cool that Twisted Lit does have that variety of ratios, actually.
Yeah, you get
which
to,
is kind of unique, you know,
Yeah.
for short films like this.
Yeah. I did music for Island of Lost Souls, the Bela Lugosi movie, which is 4.3, and it was in a festival showing in Texas in a big screen. As it was the first time in a while I'd seen a movie 4.3 in a theater, and a French Canadian actually came up to me afterwards. He'd never seen the film and he loved it. I ended up giving him a copy. And part of what he loved was the 4.3 thing. He'd never really experienced, and this is in a real theater, you know, so it did have the big height, you know, it had a scope and a framing to it. Because again, this was when people made films for the big screen, you know. So, but yeah, that was part of what he was. There was like a revelation to him. So yeah, some people, you know, dig the 4.3 format.
I think it's easier to frame in that format for some reason. 4.3, maybe just grew up with it or something. But but you know, whatever. It should be what it needs to be, you know.
Yeah.
And now you have all the tools. I used to love how experimental silent films were, because suddenly it'd be just a vertical shaft there, and you know, and
they do the iris,
circles,
you know, they'll they'll just do the iris or an iris.
Yeah, they were always screwing around with you know, ratios,
and those can be real effective. You occasionally see. I think
it should be great. It's a part of grammar of film, you know.
Yeah. Oh yeah. You don't need to use the whole frame all the time.
Yeah.
If you find reasons, you know, true split screen movies and stuff like that, they're, you know, that always comes and goes as sort of a fad almost, but that can be very effective.
That new film Suitable Flesh by Joe Lynch, which is based on the thing on the doorstep. It's really a very neat film. But he does some stuff, or a cinematographer does some stuff. He does, you know, the iris fades, and he even does some split screen in it, which I think he's just trying to do kind of a neo-noir, but harken back to sort of older films of the 20s. You know, and it's really interesting. It's really interesting looking film. If you guys have
I haven't seen it. I know, I remember Stewart kind of working on that when I was working with him with Paoli. I guess it's the same script, maybe. I don't know.
It's similar.
I know Paoli is the writer.
Yeah.
Because I'm not familiar with that Lynch guy, but
I know Joe a little bit. I think this is sort of a different kind of movie for him to have the opportunity to make also. So, you know, good for him, because it's tough to get to make any movie, let alone one you haven't already made or one that everybody else hasn't done a million times. Do
you know who produced it, Brian? What was the company that produced it? Charlie's not involved with that, is he?
No. It's AMP and RLJ, but like Barbara Crampton was.
Barbara Crampton was involved with that. Yeah.
And so was Brian Usna was as well. But I don't think Charlie was on it at all.
Okay.
Not that.
No, I don't. Think so.
And yeah, apparently they chose Joe Lynch because Stewart had been talking to him about stuff about about maybe working on something. And so when they tried to find somebody, he came basically highly recommended from the horse's mouth, you know.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so I think it was a good choice. We're going to talk to them, I think, on Thursday a little bit about it. So
But you're not showing it. You're not showing it for the festival, are you? Or
we showed it at our in-person.
the in-person fest? Okay.
We showed it at all three in Providence, Portland, and Mobile, Alabama. But no, we're not sure. It's streaming now. You can see it on Prime or Amazon. You have to rent it or buy it, but it's
right.
Okay.
It's to watch.
It's out.
Yeah, it's out now. But to get back to the birthmark, that's also filmed in what we've been calling the Pink House, right? And that's your house? Is that right?
Yeah, it's Sins of
It's
the
a
Father.
mansion.
Yeah. Sins of the Father. Yeah, that's my great grandfather built that house. As far as we know, there was never a house there before. And when my parents died several years ago, I bought it from the estate. So now it's mine. So people go, "You're the new owner." It doesn't really feel that I own, but if you say so. But yeah, that's my house now. Weirdly enough.
Where is that?
The Pink House is in Wellsville, New York, which is an hour and a half, about 2 hours directly south of Buffalo. So it's in New York, almost Pennsylvania. Since I set the birthmark at that house, I did update the story to happen in the 1860s, which is when Hawthorne lived. Most of Hawthorne's stories are written about a time kind of equally distant before him. So that's my excuse. So yeah, because when you see most Hawthorne adaptations, everybody's dressed like pilgrims, that kind of thing.
Wait a minute. So birthmark, you think is 1860s? I thought it was like 1890s.
My adaptation is set in the 1890s, but
it's saying 1890s. Yeah, okay.
It just says towards the end of the last century. Which when I made it, I knew the 20th century was going to end. I didn't know the movie would be getting re-released again by then. That was
there's another century.
Yeah. So that was an intentional. I knew the new century was coming. But yeah, Hawthorne wrote about, although he lived during the 1860s and earlier, he wrote about time before him, and so I kind of did the same thing. But that was just to sort of make it fit the house.
Right.
Yeah, because in the birthmark, he's a bit of an alchemist too.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah. The science in it, it's almost like in Frankenstein, the original book. If you read it again, you expect the great lab with the Tesla coils, and what you get is more of a cut. Yeah, it's like he builds a fire and somebody says some stuff, and hey, there's the monster. So yeah, your birthmark is more like that. It's like a really alchemy or almost magic, although both couch it in science, but the process is like alchemy.
Yeah. But you have that sequence which works.
I have the sequence where I set everything in front of the fire,
Yeah.
Which is, intentional in the story. It's almost like it feels like he's in a blast furnace with this hunchback sort of pulling, magic beans out of hell or whatever. I think the setting is intentional. I think in the dream scene, he's also like near fire. In the movie, I did more like the white surgical sheets for that.
Right. Were all of these films? I assume that in the case of the birthmark, the location, the exterior and interior locations are the same house.
Yes, there. Some of the dream scenes are not shot there, and the opening is not shot there. But the outside, the carpet matches the drapes in most of the film.
How about with a hunger artist? Were you filming?
A lot of it was a set in my college, Columbia College, the whole circus thing, is a set. And but the beginning, when he's on the stage, that's a real theater that, strangely enough, became a Jewish temple.
Oh,
so
wow.
That's another little weird thing about that Kafka, I think, would have appreciated, because towards the end of his life, he did get back into his Jewishness. He was studying the Kabbalah. As a matter of fact, I read this weird thing where it'd be the most absurd thing of like one of his stories, that Kafka had fantasies because he was going out with this woman who was this great cook, right? And he had fantasies of her and him going to Tel Aviv, him opening up a restaurant and him being the waiter. Can you imagine that? So how's the gefilte fish? And he would go, well, from the depths of hell. Yeah, but what a weird thing. But anyway, there's a shot of me conducting the orchestra briefly, and above me you can't really see it, but it's a giant menorah.
Mm.
So I thought, yeah, this is a nice little tribute to, Franz would like this, I think.
Yeah.
And it was this rotten theater, and it was closed down forever, and it was just, we were all getting, it was all mildew, and when they had to like they had to tap into the board, to run the lights, uh it was covered with water, and these guys, Goy and his buddies, are down there, putting these huge, kind of, talk about Frankenstein looking cables, to tap into the power. I'm going like, is this okay? Get out of here. Go upstairs. But yeah, that was an interest. And also his manager's office and that hallway scene where he fades away. That's also the theater. And I always like filming on location because you can get another feel, and nowadays, well, Goy's project, it's all green screen, and I think that's bad for movies. I'm sick of green screens, and you can just tell they're just phony and fake, and but they're cheap to do it that way,
Yes.
Yeah, when I first moved out to LA, I showed the birthmark to people. I had a feature which people tended to watch also, but this one producer who used to work for Columbia overseas, he said, I can tell your films are low budget because you shot in real locations.
Yeah.
And I was like, no, I really would have shot in a real location, But then I noticed when I moved to LA, even this is in the 1990s, in LA, they tended to build everything. You wouldn't just go shoot in a house, they'd build it. And then you'd have 2 walls or 3 if you were lucky, no ceiling. And there was just all these sort of prescribed things you could and couldn't do angle wise. You were very limited. Blocking wise, you were very limited, as to what you could do because it was all fake. You go to all this effort to make it look real rather than just, why don't you just,
well, the actors themselves, when they're in a location, they get a feeling of what's, and you could just tell they're in front of a screen. They don't know where they are, really. They're kind of pretending, that they're on a mountaintop or whatever, or, in some palace, but if you're in the palace, that's going to work on you as an actor, I think. And, else, but, whatever.
The birthmark, we all stayed at the Pink House, the whole time. He was shot. He's intentionally done in a sort of like, when does it take place kind of thing. I don't think you see any cars in the movie. The opening with the fire is shot inside the teak house, which Ronald Reagan actually went and visited that at Ohio State. Eric Swalstead was a teak member, and so he got us in there to shoot. And the rest of the things are like very intentionally like sparse, these completely like bland hallways with almost no detail. That's all intentional. But the clock he has in his room is a wind-up clock and a globe. It's not a even then, years ago in the late 1980s, you wouldn't have wind-up clocks. They'd be digital or electric.
Right.
He does smoke, which now he'd vape, I guess. And his phone would not have a cord. He wouldn't have a cord phone.
Yeah.
These movies do sort of seem like science fiction films or period pieces sometimes, especially if you make a movie with telephones, because you're like, oh my God.
Or computers, you can tell. Computers, how they changed. Yeah. I've been rewatching X-Files, and they go through the whole evolution of cell phones, like where they're giant and big antennas sticking out of them, and oh God, it's so funny. And the computers too,
I've always tried to stay away from people on phones and sitting in front of computer screens. It's just, it's like Hitchcock used to say, people at home look at their kitchen tables and their sinks. They don't want to go to a movie and look at kitchen tables and their sinks. It's like,
well, that's what I like about going into the past with films, and that was always my, I should tell the people I was really good friends with Stuart Gordon because I wrote his last screenplay, or the screenplay to his last movie, I should say, Stuck. And we had done different projects together. They got optioned, but never got made and all that kind of crap. But one of our arguments was always about his adaptations of Lovecraft. And I always said, why didn't you put it in the period? And he goes, people can't relate to that. Well, no, it was a budget thing too,
Sure.
And because he did do it in Dagon, actually, there's that, there's that sequence where it's a flashback,
Mhm.
and when they're on the beach and the church and all that, and then suddenly becomes sort of a period thing. And I thought it was terrific. And he also did one of my favorite movies, The Stewards, and Dennis Paoli's was The Pit and the Pendulum, which, by the way, doesn't have a pit in it, but it has a pendulum. And that's a beautiful period piece, I think, you know. So Stewart could do it when he wanted to.
I mean, to
But he
a
was
degree.
always arguing about that the audience wouldn't understand. And I just
No,
that's
it's not.
BS, I
It's
think.
what's called, yeah, it's what's called nonsense.
It's
Yeah, I mean,
nonsense, yeah.
if you tell the story, I mean, Hammer films, they came along at a time where the 50s and the 60s, you know, were very much like it was the youth generation and all this stuff. But yeah, if you can get somebody involved in a period, it's just as cool as watching a sci-fi movie. You know, it's another world, and
Yeah.
certainly, you know, so that's not. And the other thing in LA, if you're building everything and you're getting all your costumes, it's like, why not just get the old costumes off the rack? You're getting all the other ones off the rack anyway. If you're going to build a set, build an old set. You know, you're spending this money again to do something. Just go shoot in a real location. Don't, if you're going to have to build something, I
No,
always say,
like
yeah, if you build
everybody makes
something,
a
you should.
I'm
If you're
sorry,
going to build,
everybody makes like a movie of From Beyond, right? And you set that in the 1920s, that's really cool. You know, it's steampunk kind of stuff. Uh, and yeah, and Stewart was right that Lovecraft he was always writing about his period, you know, and he was up to date on science and all that kind of stuff. But that's when he wrote it. And I just think it feels better to have them in their proper time periods. But that's just one of my pet peeves, you know.
There's certainly an argument to do it either way. I think sort of
Yeah,
it's wonderful if you can do a really nice textured 20s and 20s or 30s horror piece on a Lovecraft adaptation. But I do think also that a lot of the ideas work well if, especially films like or I'm sorry, stories like At the Mountains of Madness, even, although there are some limitations there, where it's really about the past working on the present.
hmm,
It's about the sort of the creeping horror from eons ago affecting our modern world for what
hmm.
it is, right? And I think
Well,
when thematically those sorts of stories can work very well in the present, as long as you don't have satellite coverage of the whole globe and stuff like that.
if you
right.
mentioned the Mountain of Madness, I would love to see one of those rickety
Sure.
planes. Well, I mean, Indiana Jones, look, that's a period piece, right? I mean,
Oh
so
yeah,
people relate to that. I think that movie did pretty well, you know.
It did
yeah.
okay. It's not most,
Yeah. Um, and also
well,
Shadow over Innsmouth.
mhm,
It's like back then you can get the sense that they're very isolated. I mean, in today's world, that'd be very difficult, you know.
yeah.
Although his version of Dagon, it's well, like me and Andrew said in the review, was relentless. I mean, he really went all out with that movie. God, I mean, and that raining all the time, they put those poor actors through hell, you know, to do that thing.
But they were off in Spain, so you get a whole
Yeah,
different kind
yeah,
of,
it was
even if it's
Spain.
not a
Yeah.
period piece, it's like those are ancient buildings compared to anything we see in the States. And so that kind of had a period feel, even if he doesn't want us to notice that.
Yeah, he
But
said, Stewart said that where they shot it was known for witchcraft. A lot of witches lived up there, so it had that vibe, you know, to it.
Certainly.
the other thing you get with some of these adaptations is because it's modern. If they want to do a modern version, I saw some sort of rip off of At the Mountains of Madness not too long ago. It's like kind of like, oh, it's set in modernist, so now we can have people on phones and working on their computers. It's just oh my god, who gives a damn? You know, I don't want to see the CGI monster replication on their screen in 3D, and that's what they show you. It's like, oh, it's set in modern day. Let's do all this useless junk. You know.
It's funny Guillermo never went back to that Mountains of Madness after he won the Academy Award and everything. But that actually, it isn't like a blank check, really. You still got to struggle, you know. And
Yeah.
Lovecraft still has a kind of a taint about him, you know, being commercial or not. So, you know, there's still that.
Well, he's getting to Frankenstein now, right? Which is,
That's right. He's doing the Universal monsters. Yeah.
and I think what he said, when he won the award was, it was sort of like, oh, Harry, you can't do Mounds of Madness, and he was like, well, I have to do Frankenstein first. So there was this like weird like milestone. He's got to get past these markers. So maybe
It's,
although the
like,
script is very divergent from Lovecraft's story.
Yeah, he really focuses on the penguins a lot, if I remember correctly. But that's a period, isn't it? Didn't he? Isn't that a period piece? His script? Yeah,
It is. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, one of the cool ideas I heard when I moved to Los Angeles originally. Well, there was the whole, Nigel Neal writing Creature from the Black Lagoon, which Carpenter was going to make, and then Universal sort of decided, or whoever, I think it was Universal, decided to have him do Village of the Damned, which is one of Carpenter's lousiest movies. Um, that was cool because they were going to take the first two movies essentially and turn them into one, so they would catch the creature. And one presumes, since Nigel Neal wrote it, it would be pretty good, and the
Yeah.
original movie is pretty damn good too.
Yeah.
Another cool idea I heard at one point was somebody was talking about taking these sort of almost like Art Deco sort of design sketches you'll see from period films from Frankenstein and stuff, or German stuff, and doing an animated Frankenstein remake in that style. So you'd have
Ooh.
computer animation using that stylized UFA or whatever you want to put on it, Germanic kind of shadow sort of.
Expressionistic.
Yeah. And I was like, okay, that's a reason to remake Frankenstein.
Yeah.
Guillermo, I don't know. Is it a reason? I don't know. I mean, Terrence Fisher and the Hammer things, those are very unfaithful, but mostly very successful. But we'll see.
I'm interested, and also Eggers' new Nosferatu. I'm
Oh yeah,
with, and it's who is it that's in that?
it's Willem Dafoe again, right?
Right, which
Defoe's in it?
I
Yeah.
assume that I assume that he's playing the vampire,
Well,
Yeah,
I hope
exactly.
so.
Maybe not. Yeah,
which
I
would be a
lost it, yeah.
strange meta, after Shadow of the Vampire.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I know. That would be a really interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I lost a trivia contest over that.
Max
I
Schreck.
named him as playing Nosferatu. No, he's actually an actor playing. It's like, okay,
Yeah.
okay, you got me. You set me up, and I fell for it.
He's playing Max Schreck playing Count Orlok.
Right, exactly. So
William Defoe.
you lose.
Who's playing? Yeah, who's playing Willem Dafoe?
Yeah.
Count Orlok playing Willem Dafoe.
Well, I wanted to mention one other thing about Hunger Art is how it played out here, which was really the screening of my fantasies, because I had moved out here like in '83, and '83 was Kafka's centennial. He was born in 1883. Again, him and Lovecraft are basically, contemporaries, But so there was this theater out here called the Vista, which is this beautiful theater, which basically I think was built on the spot where Griffith built the Babylon set, for Intolerance. And it's a beautiful theater, and inside it looks like an Egyptian tomb, sort of like they got these Aleister Crowley looking guys, with Egyptian headdresses. And so I said to him, I have this movie, and Kafka's centennial's coming up. How about playing it there with the trial? And they did.
Oh, cool.
And that was the most fun screening I've ever had of this movie. And it did really well. They loved it, got a good review and everything. But to bring it up to date, that movie house has been bought by Quentin Tarantino, who completely has revamped it. And talking about, your thing about digital projection and all that, it's all film.
Yeah.
And it's going to be, where he does it with, what's the other one he's got? The Ario or no?
No, the New Beverly has been
New
here.
Beverly, yeah.
The
So
Arrows.
it's like all his film collection he shows, and
Right.
it opened with that thing that was actually a trailer in the Grindhouse movie, Thanksgiving, about the evil
Oh
pilgrim.
yeah.
Yeah. So what's his name? Roth,
Eli.
right? Yeah.
Yeah.
No,
Eli Roth.
Rodriguez?
Eli Roth. We should all be shocked
Eli Roth,
not
yeah.
to even bring up Eli Roth in this context.
Well, anyway, that's what that kind of opened the theater, so it looks beautiful. So when you're down here, I'll have to show it to you because it looks really beautiful. We used to live in that. It's in Los Feliz. So he's obviously 100% dedicated to film and keeping it
he
alive.
and Christopher Nolan.
And Nolan too. Yeah, that's
two
true.
of them really are like insisting that their films are released on film.
Yeah.
100 years from now, people will say, "Why are these called films?"
Film is already like Kleenex or Xerox. It's become like a euphemism, for
we still do that. Like somebody will record something on their phone or saying, "Well, I taped it."
Yep.
And do they even know what tape is? But it's like this, or, is this meme, or I don't know.
Yeah.
Instead of just saying I recorded it, or play the
Yeah.
tape,
No, it's fun. I mean, it's funny. I mean, these ancient phrases, a bird in the hand is worth two in the bush. Like,
Yeah,
how
we don't know what
long,
it
how
means.
long have people been saying that?
Yeah.
Pretty much when fire was invented and they created language, somebody came up with that. Or you get roped into something that comes from ancient Greece, where if you were walking in the street and they needed a vote, they literally took soldiers with ropes and they just roped her and put them in there, and you'd vote on whatever was to be voted on. That's what getting roped into something
Well,
means.
sleep tight, it used to be they didn't have springs and they had rope, for underneath the mattress. So
Are you
if you
in?
make the rope tight, it's more comfortable. Anyway, our
Uh,
stupid knowledge of stupid things.
somebody has to do.
Yes.
Yeah.
Uh, one thing that I think is interesting about the films that you guys have made is that often when we're talking about well, this is not a problem we have so much, but when we're talking about literary adaptations or classic literature, they're filed under, this is true of books in bookstores and libraries. They're filed under literature. They're filed under, American literature. Sometimes, when I go into a bookstore and I'm looking, because I still have this, like, I'm searching for the Necronomicon thing, where I'm
Yeah.
not searching for the Necronomicon, but now it's, uh, you know, uh, first editions or early editions of Lovecraft stories or Hodgson or Chambers or something like that.
Mhm.
I always, I'll check the horror section, but then I've got to go check the American literature section, right? Or the British literature section to make sure that they haven't scrolled away my horror authors into just, the literature place.
Mm.
Right. Yeah,
Um,
or is it under classics? Or
right.
where are they hiding? Yeah, because that happens with movies, of course, too. If you go to such a thing as a video store, if you can find one of those while you're getting some Kleenex and getting a Xerox done and getting roped into something, yeah, it's fine. Again, when I moved to LA, I was showing the birthmark to people, and somebody said, what are you reading right now? What are you reading currently? And I was reading, I think, some Ambrose Bierce at the time. And they were like, well, what are you reading that's current? I said, well, every time I open up the book and read it, it's current.
Yes.
But these films really do kind of show that pretty distinctly, that sort of overlap in genres, or they're sort of it's pretty easy to say that they're horror films, on some level, or at the very least weird tales. And they don't feel like conventional English literature kind of films, but we really like the way they're kind of treated, the way we like to treat films, which, like, this is real stuff. This isn't schlock. These are serious subjects and serious stories, and we're treating them in a serious way.
Right.
Yeah, I think
but
both.
not in an overly stuffy way, where literature
Right.
almost like literature in atmosphere for that would be like a library. Oh, don't talk too loud. Let's be polite. It's like, screw that. That's not what literature is either,
Right. That's why we're
Yeah.
keeping the literature twisted lit real small.
Yeah.
Because literature can mean that kind of stuffiness and the boring films we all had to sit through,
Yeah, it's good
because
for you.
these are just again, they're just great stories, and they're stories about, each one is about obsessions. Everybody has an obsession in this thing, and that creates great conflict, and that creates drama, and and then you got to make it work, and I think we were able to do that. So yeah, again, I'm just happy that it all kind of works together, and and it's I'm really glad you're showing it. This is the second public screening of it. Jay had a screening in Wellsville, actually, which went really well, right, Jay? I mean, they really kind of loved it there. So
Yeah, we showed it at the library. I should have had the library. They should have brought down, stacks of those authors' books, because people would have taken them on their way out, or hopefully they'll go look in the book section. I mean, that's kind of what we all kind of did, when we first discovered our school libraries or whatever. If somebody told you about something, or you're just in there, wandering around, you discover this stuff. It's waiting there to be discovered. And yeah, I'd love to do more of this kind of material, to adapt films like they're real films, not like assignments, but
Yeah.
be faithful to within a, John and I didn't, just make up new stuff or stick to the stories so closely that, you know, the birthmark in particular, like I wanted to keep a lot of the more kind of complicated wording of the time or that Lovecraft used, but all the stuff in between the nouns and adjectives I would change. So I'd use contractions, but I'd still use $3 words rather than have it all just be ye and thou and all this kind of distracting, nonsense. But
Yeah, I
yeah,
always like to find like a central, real visual image in a story. And of course, in Hunger Earth is the guy in the cage, and the cage represents a lot of things. And, and it's like he's real famous to a sideshow freak, which is kind of like life in many ways, but it's kind of a Greek tragedy in a way too. It's like how, who the gods make, they bring down, and so, and I'm sure Kafka was aware of that too, obviously. But yeah, again, thanks for showing. I hope people enjoy watching it. And one thing that when Jay showed it in Wellsville, they were looking for copies of it. So
Oh,
there's an appetite for it out there, and
did you
so.
get their email addresses?
yeah, yeah,
I think, talking about adaptations, I think it's, we talk about being faithful to the spirit of a story. I think it's okay to add stuff, and
Yeah.
to add spin. I think when an adaptation doesn't work is when the person making it hasn't really understood what the spirit is,
Right.
or they've subtracted something that as a fan of the book is coming, and it's now no longer part of it because they thought it was silly or whatever. I think that
right.
being able to get tuned into what the importance in the story is and get that message across and get that
Like,
mood across.
it's true.
Well,
I mean,
see,
it's a different animal when you adapt, but I'm thinking of which is almost a really good film, The Resurrected, Dan O'Bannon's adaptation of Charles X. Ward. Why he puts in this TV direct detective element in it. It's so goddamn boring, and it's just if he kind of stuck with the story and you can update it, that's fine. I thought what he did was great.
It's
And
almost two
but
movies.
Chris Sarandon, you got to give him a big, hand for what he did with Kerwin and Ward. And but Willett, when we interviewed Dan O'Bannon, and he kind of he said, Dr. Willett is by far the most boring, stupid character ever written on the, but he's not, he's got skin in the game. He delivered Charles Ward into the world. He's looking out for him, and all this stuff happening is driving him crazy too. Plus, there's a relationship with his parents. Anyway, I don't want to go into that, but I'm saying, I know what you mean. You got to change it when you make it into a different medium too.
yeah,
But you got to,
there's
but the spirit of it should be right.
yeah, there's a certain thing where like you watch something and you get a feeling you're in good hands or they get it, and there's also just sort of if you leave in certain setups in a story, but then you're basically too cowardly to do the payoff because you think it might be stupid. It's like, well, you probably shouldn't be doing it. But if it's written well to begin with, those holes in the story, I think even if you don't know them, you sort of feel them. Like certain things feel like they stick together. Because I've read stuff that I see a movie and then I've read the source material, usually because I felt like something was a little weird or whatever. I had no idea what it was. I didn't know what I was missing. And sometimes, yeah, like, I mean, movies can be better than books, let's face it.
Yeah.
But it's,
True
yeah,
too.
whatever. Yeah, it's not like every period and punctuation mark doesn't have to be the same, but there's if you get it, if you really trust and get the whole core of the story, and that's what you're adapting and telling, rather than like using it as an engine to like go off in some other direction, which you're comfortable in. Sometimes directors or film people take a sexy title which has been done before and has a built-in audience, and they're just interested just long enough to be able to make sure they can call it that. They're really making it about something totally different, and that
Right.
doesn't always work so well. I would say usually it doesn't.
Well, I think the Twisted Lit stories are kind of unique too, because they are short films based on short stories. So a lot of times when you're adapting a novel or something, you got to distill it. You got to combine things. You got to leave things out, and but that can work in your favor too, because sometimes novels just go on forever and they need a edit, you know?
Right.
So, but in our case, we had just the right amount of material for the films because they didn't have to be features, you know. If it's 10 minutes, it's 10 minutes. If it's 20 minutes, it's 20 minutes. It's fine, you know. So, and that's
Yeah.
really unique. Yeah.
Yeah, and with short stories, if you're adapting them into features, then of course you're padding it
And then yeah, right. Then
grossly
you're
with something
expanding
else
it,
or
right?
just making up something. So yeah, we didn't have to do that. I think it was John's really idea, or the structure of this movie, I think, and it's an anthology film really, and those kind of interest me. I think 3 is a good number for an anthology film. Usually they end up doing 4 or 5, and usually like the structure sort of feels wonky. Sure, there's going to be one that probably will be somebody's favorite over another, but John's idea of structuring this, I think, if it works, part of why it works is that he is the shortest film. Hunger Artist is basically twice as long. Birthmark is not twice as long, but it's a half hour. So it's 10 minutes, 20 and a half hour. And I think if it was reversed, that would kind of be a problem. You
Yeah.
might want to go, well, let's show the long one first because people won't be whatever. In this case, I think it worked. You get more and more story and character. So hopefully you get involved in that rather than getting impatient, which the fact that it's like, well, this is the second one. So is this the slow middle, or whatever? Yeah.
No, it has they hang together really well, you know, and that was a surprise actually when I finally saw everything together. I wasn't sure, you know, but
As
uh,
you say, I think thematically they all work well
yeah,
together.
I knew the theme was right because, you know, we kind of made each film, you know, first again, it's literature or it's from literature, and it was all about obsessions and with a twist, you know. So they're actually kind of like antique Twilight Zone episodes, I guess you could say. Uh,
Yeah, and I think because they're each short and they're all related, they not only kind of sustain that unity of effect that, like, Poe talked about in the short story from the stories they're based on, but there's a certain unity of effect kind of throughout the entire collection
mhm.
that makes them work very nicely together. So we're very pleased with it. Yeah, and we also love that I mean, this is a new collection, but these are classic films.
Yeah,
And it's great to see them brought back and restored. These are all new transfers, right?
exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. He was transferred from the original 35 negative 4K. Hunger Artist and Birthmark were 16, so 2K is usually what people use to get the most out of it, but not introducing artifacting and
Yeah.
and then both the Birthmark and Hunger Artist, I did some picture restoration in terms of cleaning up dirt, which had accumulated over the years, and some of which had always been there in my case. There's hunks of dirt. Oh, thank God I don't have to look at this hunk of dirt on this movie anymore.
Mhm.
And they were remixed because those were 16 audio, so they were both monophonic, and 16
Yeah.
optical tracks were never very good, usually shown in a room with the projector going the whole
Yeah,
time. So John wanted to fix his mix, and I sure as shoot wanted to fix my mix.
yeah.
The music had been recorded in stereo for both of those movies, but had never been heard that way. And so,
Yeah, and unfortunately, I lost my mag tracks on Hunger, so I just had the optical. And Jay was good enough to do really it was more than a remix, you know. It was like, you know, he added a lot of stuff that I always wanted to put in there, like that whole section in the theater with cheers and applause. That was all just dead air, you know. And I think that works so much better now. And you know, adding some more music and I did have the Mac tracks for the music, you know.
yeah,
Well, I
yeah,
should mention too, the composer was Andre Caparasso, who also wrote Eric Zahn music. So we were able to make those into stereo. So Jay put a lot of work into reviving the tracks, and that was, you know, because when I mixed this thing, we had like, you know, this was in the college, it's like maybe 5 tracks, I don't know, 6 tracks, and today you got like hundreds of tracks if you want them, you know. So
yeah. I remember on the Birthmark we had 4 tracks. We mixed the movie twice. We went to Detroit because that was and remixed it and improved it. But there was a lot of camera noise issues, and just the video transfers sounded okay. But with stereo, you can get a lot more separation, so you can have a lot more detail to your sound going on.
When
without
I
it
should
just
mention
being
one
a
funny
mess.
thing though, is like when he's in the cage in the circus, and when we were shooting that thing, I was concerned because there was a thunderstorm happening. I'm always saying to, did you hear that? Can you, are you hearing the rain? And you go, no, we don't hear the rain. And we worked to get the rain out of it. Well, now in this mix, we put the rain back in. And with the thunder, which actually happened when we were shooting this, like when he says, I never found the food I liked. And there was a thunderclap. I mean, in reality, and now that's in the movie, so that isn't fake. That really actually, well, it's fake, half real, but
Right. Well,
but
it's kind
again,
of
Jay put a, because Jay's like a jack of all trades, so composer, mixer, blah, blah, blah. Are you a director? Yes, you're a director.
I am a
Actor
director.
sometimes.
Occasionally, yes, occasionally in small parts.
Yeah.
I portrayed a guy who looks something like me as a director. Um, I've forgotten what I was going to say, so it must not have been
Oh,
that interesting.
yeah, I guess so.
It'll come back to me.
Well,
Yeah, no, a mix. I'd always had other people do mixes. I was only occasionally happy with mixes on films of mine, and I don't blame the mixers necessarily, their budget and other issues. Sometimes I blame the mixers. They slopped off in ways that but I was never confident enough to like do a whole mix myself. So having to do the Hunger Artist mix, John was like, "You're going to mix it too." I'm like, "Okay." I don't know that I mix a feature of my own, but I might. So it gave me an opportunity to sort of, okay, I got to do this, and then it came out, I thought, well, so I was like, oh, okay, so I can pull this off. Maybe
it came out great because your background as a musician and a composer, and that's what a mix is. It's music, really,
it's true. Yeah, it's all
Mhm.
like I said, dialogue in a movie which is scored like that's a song, should be.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
Those are the lyrics,
Yeah.
that the music should go with. And
And,
John
ju-
also,
and
John
just
had,
soundscapes, soundscapes are very important now. So
yeah, I've always told people, preach, like, you have to, every scene probably has to have ambience. In the birthmark, it's a ticking clock. Then the camera was noisy. But if you're going to have ambience, it should mean something, or it can mean something. So don't just lay in a bunch of noise. It's like, well, what might speak to the scene? Is it a peaceful scene? So maybe we hear some birds. Is it not? Then we should hear more office noises. I mean, that stuff kind of for technical reasons is going to be there. So you should use it artistically and hopefully expressively, as part of your movie. Half your movie is not the picture, it's the sound.
I got to tell you, the first time I became aware of sound, because I'm one of the old guys that actually saw 2001 when it first came out, uh, that's the first time I was really aware of a sound mix, because the soundscapes he made, because a lot of it doesn't even have dialogue, and just that whole sequence when it's actually a recording of Stanley Kubrick, when he's in the helmet, that's his breathing, and he had a bit of a cold, so that's why he's kind of raspy and like that. And it works so well. And like, the Hollywood instinct would be score this thing, put a big symphony orchestra in there and crap. And it's so minimal. And I always feel that David Lynch took that a step further and made these incredible soundscapes. He's really into sound. It's very, it's like his top priority when he makes a movie, really.
well,
But no, you can do a lot. And
half-
nowadays, boy, you have the tools.
Yeah, I mean, in the Birds, the Hitchcock movie, like, there's no natural ambience in that movie. It's all electronic. It's, he had
Oh,
these,
that's true too.
he had these two German composers who wrote the sound design. Herman actually worked with them, but they had done, there's a movie I think called The Head, not the Monkeys movie, which I endorse. I like
No, Head is good. Yeah.
but I think Herman probably, or Hitchcock, knew of these German composers, electronic experimental composers. So Bernard Herrmann worked with them. All the bird sounds are created. They're not birds, Yep.
Interesting. Yeah, no, we always say, any film, typically the films we give awards to have to kind of be the whole package. And more often than not, a film that really gets under our skin, it's getting under our skin because of the sound design, and because, when you're watching the picture, your brain is over here, and the sound can come in and do do the heavy lifting when it comes to scaring you,
Yeah,
or draw the atmosphere, the mood of the piece.
this is a kind of a weird linkage again with Hunger Arts, because I got to make it because I got a scholarship through Columbia College, which was financed by William Friedkin. And the reason I mention that is when you talk about sound, The Exorcist.
Yeah.
And there are stories where they're talking about, because he was looking at what really what sound disturbs people, and it's the sound of insects, and there's a lot of insects in that movie, and there were stories about people that were working in the lobby. They were getting ill because they could hear that. They didn't see the movie. It was just a soundtrack making them sick, so it's a very powerful tool, when it's used right. So yeah, I love using sound, and we try to do a little bit of that with Hunger Artists, to mix in like for example, there's when you're dialing into the when he's on the cage, and it sounds like he's hungry, but it's actually the roar of a lion, which is prefiguring him being in the circus, and all that kind of stuff. So there's subtle things in there that Jay did. So
that's actually what I was going to say. I mean, I'd seen John's film before I met John, even, and I never really. So when we're mixing it, John said, well, the lion growls are supposed to be like his stomach gurgling. I just never got that from the kind of flat 16 scratchy mix. And that thunder works into that too. Cause now, when he's dying, his stomach is still kind of gurgling, and we hear that sound a bunch of places. And I found some additional roars to help. So it wasn't just the same one over and over again. As a student, your sound library, you're limited to the audience sounds you originally had in Hunger Artist was like a kind of short loop you had to just keep reusing. I had the same thing with the birthmark stuff, where I was able to get better ambience or better tracks, to help us escape our student budget limitations.
Yes, yeah. Well, that's where you were back in those days. You were very limited with sound. It was very primitive, mixing it down to mono. But of course, that's not the case today. But no, sound is so important in film.
I think sound is sort of taken a big nosedive in a way. Again, like people streaming stuff, people watch stuff with the subtitles or closed captioning on because they can't hear the dialogue.
True.
People watch stuff on their phones and on small format stuff with earbuds, and like all of this stereo detail work you put in 8.0 Dolby Atmos, that's largely useless after the original theatrical run, assuming that you're sitting in the right spot in the theater, which is really like in the middle section, not too close to one wall or the other, is where you're really hearing the mix perfect. I don't think they do remixes for these other formats, but audio is really like taking a dump in terms of all these formats.
It has. In fact, I read that, I don't know if it's true or not, but a lot of times when these things get re-released for streaming or DVD, they bury the dialogue, Sometimes you could hear it better in the theater. I don't really go to theaters anymore, but a lot of times I cannot hear the dialogue. And I got a good sound system,
Yeah.
Because it's just being swallowed up by all the effect sounds and unneeded too much music in film, by the way.
Yeah.
Believe me, I love music, but Jesus, God, come on, give it a rest sometimes.
Yeah. I scored a movie for a young filmmaker recently, and there was like John Williams said about doing Star Wars films. He goes, usually, like as a composer, it's very important to spot the movie with the director to where the music's going to be. With George Lucas, that's not needed because every scene will have music. So that was kind of the case with, sometimes with directors, you're sort of fighting to have more music or use it, get in and out of it more carefully. I had a director I was working with who was doing a movie set in the 1950s. So they wanted a period sort of score, and they thought I kind of did that, which is not what I was really out to do, but okay, if you say so, sounds good to me. You don't argue with somebody who chooses you for a job, talk them out of hiring you. So I said 1950s, the film's going to have probably wall to wall music or none. It's going to be, and he really wanted to do more like none. So we reduced the cues, and then I said, where the music stops is as important as when it starts. And if you have a little 5-second music cue, you're really better off without it because it's going to be totally distracting. So I did a sort of middle of the road approach. and he took all my suggestions, going to understand where, it's better if we start it a little sooner and go to sneak it out here if we, but yeah, in the one case, the one movie, it was all going to be music. In the other case, it was a little bit of like fighting to, not put more music in, but to just use music, use music as part of the movie.
Well, anyway, we went way over a half hour. I hope that's okay. I maybe want to cut this, but whatever. It's fun to talk about this stuff.
Well, no, it's okay. It gives people, I think, a nice view into the workings, and with this modern technology, folks
This
can
modern technology
pick it up, skip around, and skip
Wait,
around.
Ryan, do you have enough tape?
Right.
You got to change the tape, don't you?
I've got to change out the reel. We should probably wrap it up. And I think this is a good place to do it. It's in sort of, most of everything that we show at the festival these days are often very wonderful, modern made, digitally made films. And that's one of the things that I think has been so great. And one of the reasons we get such good films now is there's not as much of a barrier to people getting good video or good sound, because there's a lot of great technology on your side as an independent filmmaker that would have been, unattainable, if you were an indie filmmaker working, in the 1980s or even 1990s. But it's really great to see these sort of classic films brought back to life, and to see what you guys were able to do with sort of the, the technologies and the methodologies you had, in film school, and filming on real film, and having access to, sound mixers and things. It's different, it's different to see these kind of films versus what we normally see. There's a, real gap.
Yeah. Well, one thing I just want to mention is, speaking of that, because I shot this in Chicago, and we shot it on black and white negative, but nobody in Chicago could, process black and white 16 millimeter negative. So we had to send this thing to New York. So that was a nightmare. So we had no idea that what we shot was right, so we're like waiting, and it took like a couple days for it to be shipped back. And plus you're shipping the negative, which is really, mind wrenching, gut wrenching. But again, with Mike Goy, I didn't have to worry because he knew what he was doing, but just the process, of getting it back and forth. And that's something people don't experience anymore.
Yeah,
you see, is there a hair in the gate? You got to wait a couple days, or whatever. And
in Columbus, Ohio, even with Ohio State University, I was shooting negative, not reversal film, which was used for TV news because of the quickness of it. So all that had to be shipped out to Detroit because that's where the big automakers were. So they shot, all the commercials were shot on film. They did all that stuff in-house. There was no 35 millimeter, I think probably even in Detroit by then. So that had to be shipped off someplace else. Yeah. Video, I still call it video. I know it's HD or whatever people want to call it. It's video, damn it. Video has gotten so much better that, that isn't a barrier between you. Just the risk factor of shooting and having to wait, and it comes back and it's crappy. It's like frequently the set's gone, the actors are tied up, there's just, it takes away quality. It could even take away your whole movie. Now, shooting video, you can have a disc go bad, your card cannot work, but Joseph McBride, the film writer, said that American audiences, American cinema has a fetish for like technical perfection.
Yeah.
So like foreign films, the dubbing, it's silly because the voices don't match. But a lot of that barrier has been lifted by, everything's kind of a workstation. And John and I had spent 30 years watching these movies the way they always were, hopefully liking certain things about them, but also being bugged by certain things.
Oh, yeah.
And some of those, certainly with the audio, we were able to finally fix. So that's, not everybody gets 30 years to think about, well, do I like that? I don't know. We had 30 years of that. Hopefully that was
more like 40 for Hungerers.
Okay, yeah. So your ideas are even better than mine. She had an extra 10 years to really
10 more years of worry.
But it's true. Somebody was saying any idiot can make a movie on video. And in a way that's kind of part of the problem, but it's also a big opportunity for people. And a lot of the technical stuff that I'm fairly savvy technically. I'm embarrassed to say that because that was never my goal. I got straight A's in film class in film school, except for photographic process, which was all about chemistry and light and um, but a lot of that is handled for you, now. So you can actually get in and start and not have problems we would have had where you'd shoot something and the exposure would be off because you set the ASA wrong and the whole thing's a waste.
Yeah.
So it's an opportunity for people to make something that will have a kind of surface slickness, lack of roughness that will be more accessible to people who would be distracted by that amateurish, hopefully you can get some of that amateurish enthusiasm. Orson Welles always said he never wanted to be a professional filmmaker. He wanted to always have that kind of enthusiasm and approach of being an amateur, to his work.
I just watched Orson Welles talk about the trial. Well, not, he's dead, folks. So it's a recording, but he was talking about his process of when he starts shooting on a set. And he said, I do it like no one else. It's wrong. I know it's wrong, but it works for me. And what he says, most people, they'll go on a set and they'll light the actors. I don't do that. I light the set. The set has to compete with the actors. It has to compete with the music. It has to compete with, so, which is more of a theatrical way when you think about it. You're lighting the set and then the actors kind of move around and things. But you look at his movies, though, they don't look like that. They look like these guys are lit right, But anyway, it's funny because there's a good example of him kind of tossing out the story sometimes in the trial. Although the trial, it follows the story pretty close, and speaking how like Kafka, when he would read his works out loud, he would be laughing his ass off. He was just in stitches. And there's a story about a film festival where they're showing the trial, and everybody's like real silent. It's like foreign film festival, and you're hearing this guy go, and it's Orson Welles in the audience laughing at it because that's how he saw it. He saw it as very funny. And I think there's humor in Hunger Artist too. I think it's just part of Kafka's how he coped with life. Although he was dying when he was writing this Hunger Artist, but that's a good way to end this. There's an upbeat note.
If we're to take the guy seriously for what he says, Hunger Artist at the end goes like, you shouldn't admire me. I never liked food in the first place.
I just couldn't find the food I liked.
So he turned it into a career.
Which kind of reminds me of people when they ask Wells a question and like they get real metaphysical about how he shot something, and he would kind of sit there and go, you are way above me. I just did that because I thought it looked good,
Wells films, sometimes maybe the lighting the set is part of where you get into that people aren't always lit fully. They walk in and out of light and stuff, which, I don't say Wells invented that. There's, again, German expressionism and that kind of stuff. But Wells's films, although I think the low angles are inspired by where you sit as a director in the theater. You're basically sitting in the orchestra pit, so everybody is looming over you.
Yeah,
which is the way Wells films are. If you sit there, it's like, that's what it looks like. If you sit right under the stage and look up at scenes, that's how you see them.
They had to drill into the stage for some shots on Citizen Kane. He wanted it so low.
The King Kong guys were the ones who like dug pits, so the animals could run over top of the cameras, and stuff.
It's kind of called the hero shot. The hero, we're looking up at him.
No, I put those in movies, and certain producers are like, I don't like it. I'm just looking up their nose. Well, if you're looking at their nose, you're kind of missing out on what the scenes are really about. They won't shoot a low angle because you're just looking up their nose.
I love that. We have that. And it was just by a natural thing where in Hunger Artist, when he walks to the edge of the stage and the camera's looking up, and I think that's one of the best shots in the film. I love that shot. I love that stuff.
No, it's great. I think some producer, a friend of mine was working with, didn't like close-ups because it's too unnatural. You would never be that close to a person.
Film is unnatural.
Well, yeah, exactly.
Well, have you ever seen how close people stand to each other, when they're having film? Like, I hope they're not, farsighted or.
Yeah, I know.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Films people when people have to shake hands, they have to raise them up really high because usually down out of frame, or hand things over. Hey, let me hand
another
you this
trope
thing.
where
it's an artificial, thing
if each
about
hand is a
film.
face, say, and
Yeah.
there's one in the foreground, and they're not looking at each other, and they're
Right.
talking, and then you never do that in real life, but it works in film. You know, it's fine.
Yeah.
Well, guys, it has been wonderful talking about your films and then talking about film in general with you. We could
Everyone.
obviously do this for a couple more hours.
Well, yeah.
So we're gonna we do need to wrap it up, and we actually have another Q&A coming up in just a few minutes here.
Oh, sorry.
That's okay. But no, it's been wonderful, and thanks so much for being here and talking with everyone. And thanks for everybody who's watching this Q&A and took the time to learn from these guys, because I think there's a lot of craft and a lot of technique here that we forget really should go into making a wonderful film. And we feel really lucky to be able to show this to you guys this weekend. And we hope you enjoyed it. Look at these classic films brought together newly together for the first time. And to have Mr. Strysik and Mr. Woelfel here to talk about them with us is a real treat. So thanks, guys. Thank you for joining me. And yeah, have a great day. See you later.
Thank you.
Thanks, Brian. And Gwen, somewhere lurking there. Gwen's the lurker this season.
Yeah.
He's always lurking somewhere.
She's lurking.
Literally the power behind the throne, because there's a throne there.
Right.